In early 1960s Britain, the post-war fog was finally beginning to lift. The country was rebuilding. Skyscrapers rose in place of bombed-out buildings. The Beatles were still a Liverpool pub act, and London hadn't yet become the cultural capital it would soon be. But underneath the surface, old routines still held strong. The Royal Mail was one of them. Each night, across the United Kingdom, a fleet of travelling post office trains cut through the countryside like clockwork. By day, these carriages looked like any other rolling stock plane, practical and unimpressive. But once darkness fell, they became mobile sorting rooms. Postal workers aboard would sort thousands of letters and packages as the train roared through towns and villages. Among the cargo, tucked in canvas bags and piled into secure compartments, was something far more valuable than postcards and birthday cards - cash. Large amounts of it. Banks used the Royal Mail to move old, worn-out banknotes from regional branches back to London, where the money would be destroyed and replaced with fresh bills. This practice meant that every night, trains like the one running from Glasgow to London carried hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of pounds. In 1963, the average haul on these runs was around £300,000. But it wasn't unusual for it to be much more. And here's the thing. The system was so trusted, it wasn't guarded. The money was bundled into sealed mailbags and stashed in the high-value package coach, just another section of the train. There was no military escort, no police. Only a few Royal Mail workers, 2 drivers, and a lot of blind trust in a system that had never failed. For a career criminal like Bruce Reynolds, that trust looked an awful lot like opportunity. Reynolds was no street-level thug. He dressed sharply, spoke well, and moved through London's underworld with the confidence of someone who understood how to take risks and calculate odds. Born in 1931, he came of age in the chaos of World War II and never quite settled into the quiet routines of post-war life. By the 1950s, he had made a name for himself in smash-and-grab jobs, armed robberies, and payroll snatches. But by the early 60s, Reynolds was done with small jobs. He wanted one last scorer job that would set him up for life. Something big, something elegant, something unforgettable. That idea didn't come all at once. It arrived in whispers, hints, passed between old friends in smoky back rooms. Someone had heard about the Royal Mail trains and their cargo. Someone else knew that they weren't heavily guarded. And another claimed to have seen documents showing the schedule. Reynolds listened. He began to understand that this wasn't just idle talk. The traveling post office system had a fatal flaw. It was consistent. The trains ran on time. The route was predictable. And no one expected a robbery because no one had ever attempted one. Reynolds, always a strategist, started gathering details. He learned that the most promising run was the overnight mail train from Glasgow Central to Euston Station in London. It left just before 7:30 p.m. each night and passed through the Midlands in the early hours of the morning. That meant, for a few critical miles, it would be moving through isolated countryside, quiet, dark, and mostly unwatched. He also found out that the bulk of the cash was picked up along the route, not in Glasgow itself. By the time the train passed through Buckinghamshire, it would be carrying the full haul. What made it even more tempting was that this wasn't traceable money. It wasn't fresh from the mint. It was being taken out of circulation dirty, used notes with fading serial numbers. And most of it was uninsured. If you could get to that carriage, if you could get the train to stop, if you could move fast and vanish before anyone even realized what had happened, then maybe, just maybe, you could walk away with a fortune. For Reynolds, this wasn't just a fantasy. He had the right connections. He knew men with the skills to pull it off. And if he could get the information he needed, the schedule, the route, the weak points, then it could be done. But this wouldn't be a job for amateurs. It would require electricians, safecrackers, drivers, muscle. It would take military-level precision, discipline, and above all, silence. By the spring of 1963, Reynolds had made up his mind. He would do it. He would rob the Royal Mail train. And so, he began assembling the team. But that's where things get complicated. Because once you bring in more people, you bring in more risk. And as the crew came together and the plan took shape, the seeds of both success and disaster were quietly being sown. Now, let's follow Bruce Reynolds as he recruits the men, scouts the countryside, and prepares for one of the most ambitious crimes Britain has ever seen. Bruce Reynolds knew he couldn't do it alone. If he wanted to stop a Royal Mail train in the dead of night and vanish with millions, he needed a team highly skilled, completely loyal, and absolutely silent. This wasn't the kind of job you advertised for. Reynolds tapped into the network he'd spent years building: friends of friends, trusted professionals, and men who didn't flinch at risk. Each man had to bring something to the table. This wasn't about brute force, this was about precision. The first to join was Buster Edwards, a former boxer and nightclub owner who had moved in London's criminal circles for years. Edwards wasn't a mastermind, but he had good instincts, decent connections, and more importantly, he could be trusted. Then came Charlie Wilson, quiet, serious, and deadly calm. He'd already done time for robbery, but had the kind of sharp discipline Reynolds admired. He was the enforcer, the man who'd keep order if tensions ran high. For technical expertise, Reynolds brought in Roger Caudry, a florist by trade but also a skilled electronics expert. Caudry had been part of a gang that specialized in breaking into alarms and safes. He would handle the fake signal system. To drive the escape vehicles, Reynolds turned to Roy James, a professional racing driver with a record both on the track and off. He was reckless behind the wheel but fast. The team grew to 15. Each man selected for their skill set, muscle, logistics, security, or connections. The real turning point came with the arrival of a man known only as the Ulster Man. No one knows his real name to this day. He remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the case. He claimed to have inside information, an exact timetable of the Glasgow to London Royal Mail run, details about how the train was loaded, which carriage held the cash, and how the signalling system worked. Whether he worked for the railway or just knew someone who did is still debated. But what's clear is this: without him, the heist wouldn't have happened. The Ulsterman handed over the key. Now, it was up to Reynolds to turn that key into a working plan. In the spring of 1963, the crew began to scout locations. They drove along the railway lines through the countryside, looking for the right spot. Eventually, they found it near a small bridge just outside the rural town of Cheddington in Buckinghamshire. The site was perfect, isolated, no houses nearby, and the train would be moving slowly as it approached a signal junction. From there, they began shaping the plan. To stage the robbery, they needed a base. Something close, private, and discreet. So, under a false name, they bought a rundown property called Leatherslade Farm just 17 miles from the target location. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Inside, it became a criminal operations hub. They moved in everything they needed: walkie-talkies, heavy-duty sacks, gloves, ski masks, rope, a portable red signal lamp powered by batteries, and even a replica of the track signal they'd be faking. Every detail was thought through. They rehearsed loading and unloading sacks of weight equal to cash. They timed how long it would take to uncouple train cars and move them. They studied signal equipment to understand where to place the fake red light. They even practiced their escape routes, memorizing turns, side roads, and alternate paths if things went wrong. The centerpiece of the plan was deceptively simple: a fake red signal. Caudry built a portable unit powered by a standard battery that would sit beside the track. When the train approached and saw the red light, the driver would stop just like he would for any malfunction or warning. And when he did, the crew would strike. If you're enjoying this, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next, because the night of the robbery is where things truly explode. Back at Leatherslade Farm, the men were living on edge. They played cards, they ran drills, they double-checked gear. The plan was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. 15 men, a moving train, millions in untraceable cash, and if even one thing went wrong, they'd be caught. But Reynolds believed in control. He believed that planning could override luck. They even brought in a retired train driver to learn how to move the locomotive after stopping it. That way, once the heist began, they could separate the high-value coach and bring it closer to the bridge where their trucks would be waiting. Everything was ready. The signal was built. The hideout was stocked. The crew was trained. Now, all they needed was the right night. And on August 7th, 1963, that night arrived. The Royal Mail train left Glasgow just before 7:30 p.m. It carried 72 postal workers, several tons of mail, and over £2.6 million in cash. It would pass through the quiet fields of Buckinghamshire in the early hours of the morning, and it had no idea what was waiting for it in the dark. The sun set quietly over Glasgow on the evening of August 7, 1963. To most, it was just another Wednesday night. But on the tracks just outside Glasgow Central Station, something far more important was beginning. At precisely 6:50 p.m., the travelling post office train pulled away from the platform bound for Euston Station in London. Its route would take it south through the Scottish lowlands, into the heart of England, and eventually past a rural stretch of track in Buckinghamshire. On board were 72 postal workers, dozens of mailbags, and more than £2.6 million in cash, nearly all of it used banknotes, on their way to be destroyed. That's over £60 million in today's money. But to the Royal Mail, it was just another shipment. No armed guards, no special precautions. Just a trusted system, running as it always had. What the crew didn't know was that they were heading into a trap. Roughly 200 miles south, 15 men were preparing for what would become the most famous robbery in British history. Bruce Reynolds and his crew had been camped out at Leatherslade Farm. For days, they had drilled every detail. Now, they moved into position. Just after 2 a.m. on August 8th, 2 stolen Land Rovers were quietly parked on a dirt track near Bredego Bridge, a small overpass surrounded by farmland. The night was moonless, the air still. It was the kind of quiet that feels staged-like, the moment before a play begins. Reynolds and his men waited in the shadows. Shortly after 3 a.m., the crew placed their homemade red signal beside the tracks. They had tested it dozens of times. It had to look official just long enough to make the driver stop. From the north, they could hear it before they saw it. The low rumble of steel on steel. The train was coming. In the cab, driver Jack Mills spotted the unexpected red light ahead. Protocol was clear. Stop immediately. He hit the brakes. The train hissed and slowed. Then, it rolled to a halt in the dark, just beyond the bridge. What happened next took less than a minute. The gang swarmed to the engine. Reynolds and Wilson climbed into the cab. Mills tried to resist briefly, but a quick blow to the head from an iron bar dropped him. He survived, but he was dazed and bleeding. Now, they had a problem. Their original plan involved using a retired train driver, one of their own, to move the engine and the high-value carriage up the line. But once inside, the man admitted he didn't know how to operate this specific locomotive model. It was too new. They had no choice. Despite his injury, they forced Jack Mills to drive the train to the pre-selected unloading site just beneath Bredego Bridge. By 3:15 a.m., the train was in position. The gang uncoupled the engine and the first 2 carriages. Then they opened the high-value coach and subdued the postal workers inside. No guns were drawn, no one was killed. But the threat was real, and the men inside complied. Outside, a line of robbers formed a human chain from the carriage to the waiting trucks. They moved quickly, silently, bag after bag. The canvas sacks weren't all full of money. Some held documents, others, small packages. But the crew knew what to look for. The sacks were heavy, but adrenaline did most of the lifting. At one point, one of the bags tore open, spilling money onto the dirt. 2 men scrambled to gather it. Another yelled at them to forget it and move on. Every second mattered. Inside the coach, the postal workers lay still. One later said it was the silence that terrified him most. No shouting, no chaos. Just men working, like movers packing a van. By 3:30 a.m. the job was done. The crew had loaded 120 mailbags into the trucks. They had stolen the modern equivalent of over $70 million in just under 25 minutes. They wiped down surfaces, gathered tools, and vanished into the night. It would be hours before the Royal Mail staff could reach a phone and alert the authorities. The gang had cut local phone lines before the heist. The nearest town was miles away. Back at the scene, the remaining train cars sat idle in the dark. Postal workers tried to piece together what had happened. None of it made sense. A fake signal, a precision operation, and then, nothing. By the time police arrived at the site, the robbers were long gone. There were no license plates, no tire tracks they could follow, no physical evidence left behind. To the outside world, it was as if the crew had vanished into the fog. But they hadn't gone far. Just 17 miles away, at Leatherslade Farm, the gang was already unloading the sacks. Inside the rundown farmhouse, they stacked the cash, laughed nervously, and lit cigarettes with trembling hands. They had done it. Britain's greatest robbery had gone off almost exactly as planned. But what they didn't realize, what none of them could know yet, was that the hardest part wasn't pulling off the heist. It was staying hidden afterward. Because even though the cash was in their hands, the clock had already started ticking. As the sun rose over the English countryside on August 8, 1963, the Royal Mail train sat silently on the tracks near Its engine had been hijacked. Its crew was dazed. Its high-value carriage had been emptied of over £2.6 million in cash. Police scrambled to make sense of the scene. There were no eyewitnesses, no immediate suspects, no obvious trail. The robbers had vanished. Or so it seemed. 17 miles away, the gang was lying low at Leatherslade Farm, a secluded property they'd purchased under a false name. It was cold, musty, and remote, but for now, it was the center of the biggest crime in British history. Inside, the mood was electric. Mailbags were dumped onto wooden floors. Stacks of used, untraceable banknotes spilled out. Counting them would take days. The crew passed the time smoking, eating, and playing cards. At one point, they reportedly used stolen money, as Monopoly cashier detailed the press would later run wild with. But tension simmered. The plan had been to leave quickly, 24 to 48 hours. Reynolds wanted to clear out before the police got too close. But some crew members hesitated. They feared roadblocks, they wanted to wait. And every extra hour made discovery more likely. Meanwhile, at the crime scene, Scotland Yard launched Operation Wetting, one of the largest manhunts in British history. Hundreds of officers were mobilized. Railway staff were interviewed, known criminals were questioned. Forensic teams swept the train. But it wasn't a clue at the tracks that cracked the case. It was a mistake made at the farm. August 13, 1963. 5 days after the robbery, local police received a tip. 2 suspicious vehicles had been abandoned nearby. One was a Land Rover matching witness descriptions. An aerial search was launched. From above, officers spotted a farmhouse with fresh tire tracks, a broken window, and laundry on a line. It was Leatherslade Farm. When police arrived, the robbers were already gone. But they had left behind everything. Dirty dishes, food wrappers, tools, mailbags, banknote, WRAPPINGS, dot, and most damning they were everywhere. On bottles, on doors, even on a Monopoly board. The robbers had vanished, but they'd left the police a forensic goldmine. In the following weeks, arrests began. One by one, crew members were captured, some in London, others trying to flee abroad. Charlie Wilson, Buster Edwards, and several others were quickly caught. Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind, evaded capture for nearly 5 years. In early 1964, 11 men stood trial at Aylesbury Crown Court. The press swarmed the building. The public followed every word. The defendants appeared calm, even smug. But the court wasn't amused. In April 1964, verdicts were delivered. Most of the gang received 30-year sentences, severe by any standard. The judge made his view clear. The robbery had humiliated the Royal Mail. It was methodical, military-grade theft. The sentences, he said, had to reflect the scale of the crime. But the story didn't end there. In 1965, Ronnie Biggs escaped from Wandsworth Prison using a rope ladder and a waiting van. He fled to Paris, then Brazil, where he lived openly for decades. Extradition efforts failed. Brazilian law protected him because he had fathered a child with a local woman. Biggs became a celebrity, giving interviews, recording songs, and cashing in on his infamy. Bruce Reynolds was finally captured in 1968. After years in Mexico and Canada, he was arrested in England and sentenced to 25 years. Most of the gang served long sentences. Some faded into obscurity. Others, like Biggs, stayed in the spotlight. In the decades that followed, the Great Train Robbery became a legend. Books, films, and documentaries reimagined the story. The public fixated not just on the theft, but the way it was done. No guns, no deaths. Just planning, timing, and precision. But there was a darker side too. Jack Mills, the train driver, attacked during the robbery, never fully recovered. He returned to work, but suffered chronic headaches until his death. His family believed the trauma cut his life short, yet the legend endured. The heist became a kind of outlaw myth, Britain's own Robin Hood story, minus the giving back. It spoke to something deeper, our fascination with the so-called gentleman criminal. The mastermind, the planner. The man who bends the rules and nearly gets away with it. Even now, the Great Train Robbery feels larger than life. Because it wasn't just about the money, it was about daring. It was about breaking the system, and almost succeeding. And it reminds us, sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that really happened.